today, President Trump posted on Truth Social, and I want to read it to you before we get to our guest, Haviv Rettig-Gur. Iranian patriots, now all in caps, keep protesting. Take over your institutions, 3 exclamation points. Save the names of the killers and abusers. They will pay a big price. I have canceled all meetings with Iranian officials until the senseless killing of protesters stops, all in caps. And then all in caps, help is on its way, period. MIGA, M-I-G-A, make Iran great again. 3 exclamation points. President Donald J. Trump. That posted at 9:43 a.m. East Coast time. I'm joined now by Haviv Rettig-Gur. Haviv is the senior analyst for the Times of Israel. He's also a podcaster, the Ask Haviv Anything podcast. Comes in long form and in short form. I listened to today's on the 2 Intifadas, which gave me names and dates that I didn't know. Haviv, Happy New Year to you. Welcome back.
Thank you, Hugh. Good to be here. And also just the Free Press. I'm also with the Free Press as a Middle East analyst.
I've always got to say that. Times of Israel, the Free Press, and then we need to tell people you're also on Patreon, which is the only Patreon I belong to because it's the only one I get real value. I subscribe to the Free Press, but I get real value from your Patreon. How do people find that? Just Patreon and Haviv Rettig-Gur?
Yeah, or Ask Haviv Anything on Patreon. Thanks so much for the plug. I really appreciate it.
Well, it's only $5 a month, and it's really very much worth it, like Dan Senor's special edition as well. I've gone into funnels, silos for my news to go deep. Haviv, before I go any further, what do you make of what I think is a hinge moment in Iran, especially in light of what President Trump posted this morning?
At this very moment, there are reports that phone lines can now call out of Iran again. Some of the digital blackout appears to be lifting, or was broken, or maybe hackers did it. We don't quite know. There was a news from CBS News that they got initial reports that the reports about 12,000 dead in the last just 2-3 days that Iran International ran. It might be much higher than that. People in Iran are talking about something very big, very dramatic. These are, early days. We don't have a lot of information. A whole country taken off the internet. But the regime crackdown has gotten lethal. The regime itself has admitted 2,000 dead. So everything is escalating. All the gloves are off. The regime is terrified. And into that context, those signals that we can get out of Iran, President Trump's statement probably echoes very, very loudly. What he said on your podcast, what was it, 3 days ago, where he just said, they know that they're going to pay a price. And he urged people to take the names of officers and officials involved in the repression. That's actually really fascinating because we've already seen that. There was this, what they called a Tiananmen Square moment, where one protester was sitting down on the street in front of the police trying to clear out the protests. And that protester would go on to get beaten by those cops. And what's really fascinating is within a few hours, the names of the agents of the regime who beat the protester were publicized on Iranian internet. And so it's a new day. It's a new moment. Iranians are no longer willing to play the regime's game in huge, huge numbers. We don't yet know how it's going to go. It's important to say 20% of this country is deeply Islamist and believes in the regime's ideology and will die for the regime. Not literally 20% of the population will die, but 20% of the population will fight. And the entire Basij militia is hundreds of thousands of people with many more who could volunteer. So it's almost a kind of mini civil war when you have a revolution against this regime. But nevertheless, it has never gone this far. And the rage and the lack of any willingness to tolerate the regime pretending like everything's okay or can never go back to normal, that's all new. And so it is a new moment. It could fail, but it's never gone this far before.
So, Aviv, I had done an entire outline because we schedule this 6 weeks, 2 months in advance to get a hold of Aviv. He's in demand everywhere in the world, and so I'm happy to talk to him every month or so. And we'd scheduled this weeks ago, and I have a whole long list of questions that are going to get pushed to the back about the Haridam and the legal reform and the elections. That's next time. This just came up. Not long ago, you had Barry Strauss on your program. He wrote the new book last year, Jews versus Rome. Fascinating book. I had listened to it on tape. After I listened to your interview, I went back and bought it because the names are hard to get when you're listening. I mean, I know Pompey the Great, and I get Tiberius, and I know this proconsul and Cestius and all these various things, but I need to get the chronology in black and white. So I really want to kind of do the same thing with you throughout that book, which is the history of the Great Revolt, 66 AD to 70, and of the Diaspora Revolt and of the Bar Kokhba revolt in about 130 AD. I want to go back then because Iran is all through that book under the name of Parthia. And so Iran, modern day Iran, was part of ancient Parthian Empire, the only empire that kind of got to a standoff with Rome. Prior to the revolution in 1979, how did Israel and Iran get along?
They were quite good friends. They were. I don't want to exaggerate it. They weren't, bosom buddies, but they had a real relationship and alliance. They shared enemies, and sharing enemies is a very powerful incentive in the Middle East to be close. And more than that, the Iran of the Shah. Okay, the Shah had a repressive regime. It was a deeply problematic regime. It killed people. It was nothing compared to what the Ayatollahs would go on and build after the revolution to topple the Shah. But nevertheless, the Shah was not a democrat. But the Iran of the Shah was a modern country. It was a country where women walked around with their hair out, and universities were real universities. And one of the tragedies of the last 47 years of Ayatollah's rule, and there are many tragedies. Iran is a gutted country. It's an economy in ruins. It doesn't have electricity. It doesn't have, it's one of the wealthiest in terms of hydrocarbon reserves countries on earth, and people live with less electricity than in much of the third world. I mean, it's a country that has been demolished by this regime. And the Iran before this regime of the Shah was a country that was modernizing with modern universities and a modern economy, and was looking for ways to have investment and development. Incidentally, last time you interviewed President Trump noted that he had friends back in the 70s who were real estate developers in New York, who were looking at Iran to build and had built buildings in Iran, and investing in Iran was a smart move because of those hydrocarbon reserves, because it was an economy that could have turned the place into, some mix of Saudi Arabia and Turkey. There's nothing preventing that from happening, except that the Islamist section of Iranian society took over the country and ruined it. Israel saw a friend. Israel saw a modern nation. And Israel saw basically just the modern commercial world that everybody wants to live in. In other words, a world that's not taken over by crazy ideologues demolishing their own country just to retain power. So Iran was that. It was a friend. It was what the Middle East should always have been and would have been, but for some very
and
bad
could
ideology.
be. When you say it could have been a mix of Turkey and Saudi Arabia, I think it could have been another Israel, because they had the wealth and they had the university and a tremendous base in 1979 of an educated elite who could have been at the vanguard of the technology revolution of the last 50 years. Instead, they went backwards. And you're probably not old enough to remember this, but I remember it well. In 1979, I was working for then exiled President Nixon in San Clemente, and Ray Price and I, and he would sit on a couch and watch this, and the whole world thought Khomeini was going to be a good force. Did the Israelis get tricked by that too? The whole world, not Nixon. Nixon said this is a disaster. But did Israel think Khomeini would bring anything better than the Shah?
I can't speak for every analyst, and it's a big country with a lot of people who have very strong views, and not necessarily a lot of knowledge. So, speaking as a media pundit, right? No, for Israel, this was a disaster, and it was very clearly a disaster. And in fact, Khamenei made a point of building his coalition with the communists and building his coalition with the third world, as we might call them today, with all of these anti-Western powers that were secular, that were progressive in Iran. I'm not speaking now about college campuses in America. I'm talking about, Iran in the 70s. He actually built his coalition that was able to topple the Shah with these other powers. One of the main things they shared of all the topics on earth, they didn't agree on religion, they didn't agree on the economy, they didn't agree on who should actually run the place after the revolution. They all agreed that the Jews of Israel were an evil crime against history and had to be removed, whether for progressive secular reasons or for Islamic reasons. So this was a
Stand by,
disaster for
America.
Israel.
I got to take a break and go off air. I'll be right back after the break. You're listening to the Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network, watching it on the Salem News Channel, And this will be part of the podcast today as well. Don't go anywhere. Stay tuned. Haviv Rettig Gur can be followed on X at Haviv Rettig Gur. He is with the Free Press. He is with senior analyst at the Times of Israel. His Patreon, Ask Haviv Anything. Joined now by United States Senator Joni Ernst. Senator Ernst, welcome back. How are you in this new year?
Oh, I'm great, Hugh. Thanks so much. Thank you for having me.
I want to begin by asking you, as a veteran of the Armed Services Committee and in the Senate for so long, what do you think about the situation in Iran and President Trump's post this morning, reiterated in a speech that help is on the way from the United States?
Well, I think it is important that we are encouraging the people of Iran. We see them rising up in protest. We think it's important to continue to encourage them to do so. We do want to see them take over their own institutions. They want to be free of this awful regime that has really come down on them when it comes to issues of civil rights. They really have seen such poverty and devastation across that nation. And when you think back many decades, this used to be a very progressive country, progressive in a way that it was more modern and westward leaning. And it has backtracked so significantly when it comes to human rights and prosperity. We want to see them do better. They are a huge threat to the United States and Israel as they stand. Should this regime fall, the world will be a much safer place.
Now, I don't know if you will have better sources than anyone else at this point. I don't know if you got a briefing. But the numbers that the regime have killed in just the last 5 days vary from a minimum of 2,000. The regime admits that, up to 12,000. That is a level of violence we've never seen from them before.
Yes, absolutely, Hugh. And those are the same numbers that I have seen as well. So quite a range there. But what we do know is that, of course, the regime is trying to block any information that will flow out of Iran to the rest of the world. And so it could be those numbers of a higher scale, which is really, really very scary to those families that left Iran many years ago and are wondering, are their loved ones impacted by this? How many more will be killed in these uprisings? So again, I think the president is doing the right thing by encouraging the citizenry to stand strong against the regime, but it does come at a human toll for the Iranians, which is unfortunate because oftentimes we will take a look at the leadership and we'll just assume that all Iranians are bad like the regime, and that simply is not true.
So no one in the Senate's gotten any special briefing on this yet. I find it extraordinary in 2026 that the Western media doesn't have any visibility into Iran.
Well, I'm sure that we do have operatives that are keeping an eye on the situation. Most certainly that would be true. And the Intelligence Committee may have more information than the Armed Services Committee does at this point in time. But again, it's similar to circumstances. I'd say use an extreme example like North Korea, where there's very little intelligence that flows in or out. And I think the regime, because of the uprisings right now, is really putting forward a concerted effort to make sure that information is not flowing to Western media outlets.
All right, Senator, if we can turn our attention back home, I heard Senator Murphy yesterday. I was doing a hit on Fox, and they played some tape of your colleague from Connecticut urging another shutdown of the government over the deployment of ICE to Minnesota. First, do you expect a shutdown? And second, what do you think of the merits of his argument?
There are no merits to this argument. We should not be shutting the federal government down. We know that when we're looking for winners and losers in government shutdowns, the only losers are the American people, those that are relying on federal government services, those that are working and not receiving paychecks through government shutdowns. The national security, is always impacted as well during government shutdowns. So I think that he needs to rethink his words, and he needs to bring ideas and thoughts to the table. That's what we should be doing in the United States Senate. I'm very hopeful that we get this appropriations package done and the follow-on packages that Senator Susan Collins of Maine has been working on with Tom Cole over in the House. They have spearheaded some incredible discussions. We've got a large consensus both in the House and the Senate. And let's get this done. Let's not shut the federal government down. It does nobody any good.
The senators, last week, President Trump was my guest, and he said he's going to request $1.5 trillion as the defense budget next year. That would be up from about 9.3 trillion, I think. 930 billion this year.
Mm-hmm.
What do you make of that kind of a hike?
Well, holy cow, that is a huge hike. However, what the president is taking into consideration is advanced adversaries around the globe and how we need to stay cutting edge or better. We must maintain that qualitative military edge when it comes to our adversaries. If you look at protection of the homeland with our Golden Dome, that will require a huge amount of funding to get up and going. So he is looking very broadly at how do we protect our homeland and, if necessary, project strength and power abroad. I think it's the right thing to do. Now, whether it happens at that scale or level of funding is yet to be seen. Certainly, I would love to see an increase. However, chairing the Senate Doge caucus and always doing my squeal awards as well. There are areas that we know we can cut back on in the Department of War, Department of Defense. We can find savings, and we need to use technology like artificial intelligence to help us fill the gaps where necessary and make sure that the cost is staying ahead or paired to that benefit. So
Senator,
I look forward to it. Glad he's doing it.
You mentioned Doge. We've all watched, somewhat astonished as the Minnesota scale of fraud has been unveiled. It began in 2022, got bigger in 2024. This year it's just exploded. Of course, in California, we had COVID fraud in the billions of dollars as well. Does every state have a Minnesota problem, do you think, or is it just Minnesota?
I think there are many states that have this problem, and we have highlighted a number of the issues that we have seen, whether it's through the Small Business Administration and the Paycheck Protection Program or the economic injury disaster loans. We know that there were so many cases of fraud through those specific programs. And here, yet again, we see additional fraud when it comes to fronting small businesses that are parading around as childcare centers or what have you. I caught an earmark that Ilhan Omar in Minnesota was doing for a supposed East African Substance Abuse Treatment Center, which happened to be co-located with a Somali restaurant and run by 3 individuals that shared the same residential address. So big red flags. I called it out, and thankfully then the House did pull that earmark out of their funding bill. But this fraud is running rampant. For those of us that have been crying out for attention over the past many years, finally, we are getting traction. And I'm glad that we see the level of attention that Minnesota is getting. But Hugh, absolutely, there are other states as well where fraud is rampant.
I hope we continue the effort to get to the bottom of all of that. Senator Joni Ernst has been a big path leader in finding that way forward and will continue to do so. Thank you, Senator Ernst. Other stories are happening today in the Supreme Court. 2 cases were heard. Little versus Hecox and West Virginia versus BPJ. Both involve state statutes that prohibit transgender athletes from playing in sports reserved for biological sexes. So boys who are transgendered girls are suing for the right to play in girl sports. The justice on the center left is Elena Kagan. She used to be Harvard Law School Justice, Solicitor General of the United States. She said, this is pretty easy to begin with. Cut number 2.
You wouldn't think that because we are talking about an as-applied challenge to a law that's facially everybody concedes legitimate, that the burden should shift to you?
Okay, so the burden is on the transgendered community, I think is what Elena Kagan was saying. Here is Justice Alito talking with Kathleen Hartnett, one of the counsel in the case. Justice Alito, cut number one.
Well, to pick up on the issue of discrimination on the basis of transgender status, let me just go to some basics. Do you agree that a school may have separate teams for a category of students classified as boys and a category of students classified as girls?
Yes, Your Honor.
If it does that, then is it not necessary for there to be, for equal protection purposes, if that is challenged under the Equal Protection Clause, an understanding of what it means to be a boy or a girl or a man or a woman?
Yes, Your Honor.
And what is that definition? For equal protection purposes, what does it mean to be a boy or a girl or a man or a woman?
Sorry, I misunderstood your question. I think that the underlying enactment, whatever it was, the policy, the law, we'd have to have an understanding of how the state or the government was understanding that term to figure out whether or not someone was excluded. We do not have a definition for the court. And we don't take issue with we're not disputing the definition here. What we're saying is that the way it applies in practice is to exclude birth sex males categorically from women's teams, and that there's a subset of those birth sex males where it doesn't make sense to do so according to the state's own interest.
Well, how can a court determine whether there's discrimination on the basis of sex without knowing what sex means for equal protection purposes?
I think here we just know we basically know that that they've identified pursuant to their own statute, Lindsay qualifies as a birth sex male, and she's being excluded categorically from the women's teams as the statute. So we're taking the statute's definitions as we find them, and we don't dispute them. We're just trying to figure out, do they create an equal protection problem?
All right, suppose this school that has a boys, let's say, track team and a girls track team. The school has that. And a student who has the genes and the reproductive system of a male and had those at birth and has never taken puberty blockers, never taken female hormones, never had any gender altering or affirming surgery, says, nevertheless, I am a woman. That's who I am. Can the school say, no, you cannot participate on the girls' team?
Sorry, so you're just a birth sex male who has all the advantages of birth sex male hormones, and can the school bar him from the women's team? Yes, they can.
Oh, done, over. Cut number three, more sound. Don't get in an argument with Justice Alito. Cut number three.
That has a boys, let's say, track team and a girls.
Oh, it's the same cut. Okay. I'm just here to tell you, don't get in an argument with Sam Alito. Molly Hemingway's got a book coming out on Justice Alito. I've never met the man. He worked down the hall from me when I was at Justice. We're roughly the same age. He's a couple of years older than me. I was in the AG's office as special assistant. He was with the smart people down in the SG's office. And then the other smart people were on my left down at the OLC office. The political people, we went in the AG's office. And nobody knew if we knew anything. But Alito was smart then, smart now. Don't get in an argument with him. I'm in the Relief Factor studio. I got to take my Relief Factor because I do so every day at this time. And did not get up the implacable hill yesterday, but will tomorrow. I carry in curcumin, resveratrol, omega. And the reason I will is quite simply, I want to be able to continue to trundle along, up or down or along the ocean for as long as I can, decades or into the future, I hope. My dermatologist, where I spent a wonderful morning getting zapped and cut up like I do every year, actually 3 times a year when necessary, said to me today, the secret is staying moving, Hugh. And I asked her if she was going to retire because I don't want her to retire. And she said, I'm only 67. I'm not going to retire. I'm going to be working for decades. I said, great. Don't give up. She said, I swim now. I used to play golf. I used to be a runner. I swim. I said, I'm still trundling. If you want to be like her or me, keep going. Relief Factor, 1-800 number 4 and the word relief. 3-week starter pack is $19.95. 1-800, the number 4, and the word relief. Or go to relieffactor.com. You'll find the starter pack there as well at relieffactor.com.
To Iran this morning that help is on the way for protesters. What did you mean by that? What kind of help?
You're going to have to figure that one out. I'm sorry.
How many
people have been killed in Iran?
Nobody's been able to give me an accurate number. I have heard numbers from everything's a lot. One is a lot. But I've heard numbers much lower, and I've heard numbers much higher. We'll be knowing. We're probably going to find out over the next 24 hours. I think it's a lot.
Welcome back, America. That was President Trump in Dearborn, Michigan this morning. When asked, what does it mean that help is on the way, he said to the reporter, you're going to have to figure that out. So I'm going to ask David M. Drucker, chief political correspondent for The Dispatch, and dapperly dressed as always. How do you think we're supposed to figure it out, David?
I guess we'll just have to wait for a report of something. Look, I wouldn't expect any president, to foreshadow what it is they were going to do. You don't want to let the Iranian regime know what's coming, know what you have planned, and you want maximum benefit. You want to weaken, if not decapitate, the regime.
I think we lost David there. That's unfortunate. He's frozen, so we're going to wait for David to come back. Yeah. Go ahead, David.
I was saying look, you're never going to have a president who foreshadows something like this. And occasionally presidents will tell us what they're not going to do, which is also a mistake. So I think this is a case where the president's vagueness is an asset in what we should be hearing from him, which means we're just going to have to wait and see, like you said.
Well, when he says you're going to have to figure that out, the one thing that no journalist could figure out is a cyber attack on the regime's internal operations. Do you agree with me on that? That's an assumption on my part, is we would not know if their internal operations of repression had been dislocated by cyber attack, would we?
I think you're right about that, actually. So I will say that your assumption there, or your hypothesis, could be correct and is very viable.
So my way of thinking is, I got to admit to lifting this from the commentary podcast today. President Trump doesn't go in for quiet. He likes boom. And therefore, something's going to go boom in Iran. That's my working assumption. Assessment?
Well, I think that's a viable theory, and I think he's proven that he does like a big spectacle when he takes action. I think he's also proven at times to be cautious and has chosen not to take action. I think sometimes he's been compelled to take action, even if he was initially hesitant. So I will just say that I could imagine a range of outcomes here in terms of how the U.S. is going to act in regard to what is happening in Iran. None of these would surprise me.
None of them would also involve boots on the ground. That's my theory. But I guess we had boots on the ground in Venezuela for an hour and a half. So I guess that's a separate category, boots on the ground, very briefly. I don't see that happening because we haven't got an armada off the coast of Iran, David Drucker.
Yeah, well, listen, it depends on how you look at boots on the ground, too. I mean, if you're talking a light footprint with special forces, I don't look at that as boots on the ground in terms of a large-scale military operation.
And I don't think that's on the table. Now, I want to move to the other big story of the day because nobody knows nothing except the president has set the table for something. The Supreme Court arguments in the two cases, West Virginia versus BPJ and Idaho versus Hecox. Have you listened to any of that yet?
I listened to one clip, and I was busy today and I haven't had a chance to catch up on this or check out our SCOTUS blog coverage over at the Dispatch. But, Hugh, I will say, as a matter of politics here, this is an argument that the left lost in 2024 and even now still can't win. There are a lot of arguments they're winning at the beginning of 2026 that they weren't in 2024. This isn't one of them. So it'll be interesting to see how the court rules. But the politics of this is still settled, in my view.
I think the court's going to rule at least 7-2, upholding Idaho and West Virginia's right to ban biological boys playing in girls' sports. But we'll see. David, it's my belief that the political cycle will be fixed by the end of June when the Supreme Court hands this down. It might be the last event that will make a difference. Right now, the Republicans are underwater. Do they have enough time to turn that around?
Well, we'll see. You're right about the general calendar of when voters' minds get fixed. At the very least, Senator Mitch McConnell will agree with you because he's always argued, and he's pretty good at assessing political atmospherics, that you have 6 months into the election year at best to turn the battleship if it needs to be turned. There's always time, and nothing's certain, and history isn't always proof of what's coming next, but it's going to be tough, and we'll just have to see what happens.
So in terms of what's impacting those numbers, and the Democrats have a 5-point lead on the generic ballot. Not the worst lead ever, not the greatest lead ever, but not bad either. I think the price of gas will matter. I believe that redistricting will matter. I don't think that the ICE raids will matter. Do you disagree with me?
Well, I don't know. Let me just say, I don't know if I agree. Let me tell you what I think. You can decide whether I agree or disagree because you made a couple different points. I think it's possible the ICE raids will matter because they're getting such broad news coverage, and people are going to have opinions on them. I think affordability broadly matters, and not just one metric of affordability, whether it's gas prices or something else. And right now, the polling on that is just horrible for Republicans. I think redistricting is going to end up being a wash, therefore not matter. And I think this is about how Americans feel and not about whatever the broad macro indicators tell us about an economy that remains very resilient.
Right now, David, I believe in being consistent myself. And I said going into 2024, what are you paying for your groceries matters the most. Gas number 2. I still believe that, and groceries aren't coming down even though gas is. Do you agree with that assessment about priority? What does it cost to eat?
I think this problem is bigger. So I don't disagree with the way you've laid that out, but I think the problem is, and the reason I have been using the word affordability going back, almost a year, is because when I'm talking to people who talk to voters, and when I talk to voters, this isn't just about particular items on the bills they're paying. This is about this idea that they're stretched in every direction, from housing to food to paying for their kids' education and everything else. It's different than the usual inflation anxiety.
Affordability is an accordion word, and it's a good one for us journalists to use. David M. Drucker, follow him on X. He is with the Dispatch. I'm not going to play you all of Justice Brown Jackson because Steeler fans feel bad enough having blown up yesterday. Carl, I'm sorry. They completely fell over like zombies. Aaron Rodgers was a statue. He threw an interception for his last pass, and Mike Tomlin quit today. So they're already down in the dumps, right? And so I'm not going to play all of Justice Brown Jackson, but here's a little bit that I think even the Steelers fans who are depressed today can understand. Cut number 5.
But they are being prevented from playing on the team that matches their gender identity, correct?
That's the effect. So let me use your example from earlier. You said there's a cisgender woman, she could play on the team she wants.
Right.
There's a boy who identifies as a girl, he can't play on the team he wants. Take that same boy and switch his gender identity, but say he still wanted to play on the girls' team. Say he was a very unathletic boy. He likewise couldn't play on the team. So it's not the gender identity that's keeping him off the girls' team, it's his biological sex. His gender identity is wholly irrelevant to it. Now, I agree with you, there's a very significant disparate impact on transgender individuals by this law because they're the boys who are most likely to want to play on.
Have we said that Title IX never covers that kind of disparate impact in terms of its discriminatory effect?
Well, it certainly doesn't cover disparate. First of all, I don't think Title IX covers disparate impact, period, because it uses.
But in terms of its discriminatory effect, I'm just trying to understand it. Is there something to this notion that differential treatment in effect in this way could be something that Title IX cares about?
I don't think Title IX covers disparate impact even on the basis of sex, and it certainly doesn't cover disparate impact on the basis of gender identity.
Okay. That just is, in other words, Justice Brown Jackson, you have no idea what you're talking about, and you're waiting for your clerks to cobble something together afterward. The justices that I know would never, ever tell me what they think of another justice. They would never do that. What I think they think of Justice Brown Jackson is that she's from a different legal planet than the one they inhabit. Doesn't mean she's dumb, just means she went critical legal theory, deconstruct everything. Makes not a lick of sense, not a lick of sense. 0 cents, nothing to see here, not happening, 0 cents being made today. Those statutes from West Virginia and Idaho are going to be upheld, and they're going to be upheld by at least 7 justices. The wild card is Sonia Sotomayor. Justice Brown Jackson is going to write some gibberish about disparate impact and disparate effect and mythological creatures that bark in the night in the sky, and that somehow there's a precedent in the Oracle of Delphi that is applicable here, and therefore transgender is great. That's going to be her dissent, and it's going to be a dissent that everyone is going to be ashamed to put their name to. So it could be 7-2, it might be 7-1-1. It depends on the quality of their clerk. Or maybe she'll retreat. Maybe she'll just give up, because this is not an argument that's winning. I'm joined by Bret Baier, who is host of Special Report. Bret, we got a lot of news to cover, but I want to start with a little bit of sports. Mike Tomlin retired today. He lasted 19 years as a head coach. Now, you've been the anchor, I think, of Special Report for 17, and I've been doing this for 26 years, 25 and a half. I can't imagine being an NFL head coach for 19 years. Can you?
No, that's pretty long tenure. Good afternoon. Yeah, I think he had a hell of a run, but the not winning the playoff game, that hangs over your head for a long time in a football town like Pittsburgh. It just happens. But that's a long tenure.
He's never had a losing season either. That's what's remarkable about it. That's like year-over-year growth every year in the broadcast business. I'm just amazed that he's calling it in. All right, Bret, today the president posted this morning, help is on the way to the Iranian people. There will be no more negotiations. I think that's a throwdown, and I don't think Donald Trump backs away from things like that. What do you think?
I agree. And I think, having talked to a lot of people, that there's a sense that something is happening, whether it is a green light for the Israelis, whether it is some kind of attack by U.S. forces to assist the protesters in some way, shape, or form in Iran. I think that there is this sense that in the next hours or days that there may be some kind of action.
So I agree. But I also think most American news coverage is inverted. We're focused on a suburb or a close-in burb of Minnesota, Minneapolis, where the killing took place of the woman demonstrator. Legal observer is the term of art that's being thrown around. And Iran is convulsing, and maybe as many as 12,000 people are dead. Are we not covering Iran as much because we can't or because we don't want to?
Well, I don't know. I don't speak for other networks. We're covering it a lot. It may be our lead tonight. We have the exiled Iranian crown prince on.
Oh, you do?
Reza Pahlavi, and we've got reporting from the ground, from talking to people through Starlink, and we're full court press on it. We're obviously covering all that's happening in Minnesota. We're obviously covering the president's talk about the economy in Michigan, and we're walking and chewing gum at the same time. But I believe, as executive editor of Special Report, that potentially that's one of the biggest stories that we could be covering this year in the early months. What happens in Venezuela is another one. But I think it really is consequential. And if it is, as a lot of the observers think, a different scenario this time, you're talking about something that could change the world.
Yeah, it's a hinge moment. In 1979, when the Shah was forced to flee, that was a hinge moment, and we've lived with the consequence of that for 47 years. If the Crown Prince comes back, and I don't know what you're going to get to, I want to ask you how you prepare for that, because I've only seen one interview with the Crown Prince. It was done by Mark Dubovitz early this year or late last year in 2024. I have no idea how you prepare for it, but he has been more above the horizon in the last 2 weeks than he has been in 25 years, I think, Bret. So where did you find him? Can you discuss that?
Yeah, he did. I think he did one interview with Maria, but he is in town here in D.C., and he is meeting on Capitol Hill. He's had several meetings with senators and House members. I'm not sure he's been to the White House, but I know he had some administration meetings. And, I think that the scenario is that he wants to get back to Iran to be some kind of interim leader eventually if the regime does in fact fall, and then get to an election. At least that's what he's talked about. But getting from point A to point B is really interesting. I prepare for it in that I've studied, what he said before, and also we want to get his sense of talking to people on the ground to give some ground perspective about what's really happening in Tehran and other cities.
That's tonight on Special Report, Crown Prince Pahlavi with Brett Baer. Brett, last week I talked to the president. I asked him if he would meet with the Crown Prince. He said, I didn't think that would be appropriate. Now, the president is not above throwing smoke in my eyes, so I don't know if that means he's not going to do it or not. Did you get anything out of him, or will you get anything out of him about meeting with Trump?
I'm going to ask, definitely. I don't think he has. I don't think he's met with them yet. And I say yet because, I think that there is some sense of, this is a tipping point moment and some planning towards what would happen if the regime collapsed and what that looks like. The protesters, a lot of them are calling his name because they think it can be a transition figure to get them from point A to point B. But, he doesn't have an army, and he would need some serious help to get back in power.
What I haven't been able to figure out, Brett, maybe your resources can, when the real goes to zero value, except for members of the regime, I don't know what other choice people have. Their life savings have been wiped out. The Bazaris, the people who are the merchant class, the middle class, they're all wiped out. And what Haviv Reddy Gur has told me, I'm playing it next hour, 80% of the regime, 80% of the 90 million Iranian hate the regime, 20% have nothing but the regime. Does that break down with your understanding of it generally?
Yeah, and it's smaller and smaller is that latter figure. And that provides, the tipping point moment. I had a couple of experts on. Norm Rule, who used to be the CIA. He's great. And then Kareem
Bingo, the two bigs.
The two biggest names the other day on analyzing this. I thought they were really spot on. There are essentially a list of things that you would need for the Iran regime to collapse. And this time, more than any time, they've clicked all five of those pillars.
Now, Kareem Sajipour is with Carnegie. Norm, I don't know who Norm's with. He might be still working for Langley. Is he an optimist?
He's an optimist, actually. I mean, he's a realist. It's going to be tough, but he's very aggressive as far as this being the hinge moment. So we see this as just everybody we're talking to being much bigger than anybody is making of it.
All right. My last question is really in the tall grass. Yesterday, the Wall Street Journal reported that Vice President Vance and other White House aides were trying to talk the president into negotiations, not the use of force. Late last night, the vice president's comms team began to push back hard on that. His head of comms posted on that's nonsense today. He's right behind the president. And I'm sure they've reached out to everyone at Fox as well as me. That's just not true. Who do you think is pushing the narrative that J.D. Vance is an isolationist? Because it ain't J.D. Vance.
Yeah, there's an interesting political dynamic outside of the foreign policy things that are happening inside the White House. And, it all has to do with 2028. It all has to do with positioning. And, Marco Rubio's ascendancy and a spotlight on him and the attention post-Venezuela and some of the questions that you're getting. Now, where is it coming from? I don't know. It's not Rubio's people, I don't think, but I think that there are some political swings that are trying to position this moment ahead of 2028.
All right, now, last question, Brett. Your old colleague, Pete Hegseth, is in all the pictures, but no one mentions him when they talk about 2028. Do you think he might think he would, fit behind the Oval Office desk pretty well?
Well, I think every defense secretary and secretary of state probably looks in the mirror and sees a president, but I'm not sure that Pete's in that camp. I don't know. I haven't talked to him about it, and I don't know. Obviously, we're no longer in the Pentagon, and we've asked for interviews nonstop with the Secretary of War, and haven't gotten one. So we aspire to, and that'd be a question I'd ask.
That's probably why he knows that. Brett Baer, I'm going to be watching tonight Reza Shah Pahlavi, Left Behind a Crown Prince, and that is going to be Brett's guest tonight at 6 p.m. America's anchorman, Brett Baer. Thank you, Brett. I appreciate the time. Don't go anywhere, America. Coming back with Lilacs. I am going to cover Minnesota. I am going to go back to the Supreme Court case. I'm going to do all of that. And then Haviv Reddick Gur of the Free Press and the Times of Israel is going to be here for hour 3 on the Iranian paradox, which is how could a country that was on the cusp of actually being the dominant power in the Middle East in 1979, when the Shah was there, they could be as technologically advanced as Silicon Valley, as Israel. They could be as high-tech as anywhere in the world, and they're a backwater where the electricity doesn't work and the water is polluted, and they are a shadow of their former selves militarily. All they can do is send guns and money to terrorists. How did that happen? Haviv Reddick Gur will be here in hour 3 to talk about that. There's a lot going on in the news today. There were oral arguments in 2 cases on transgender laws in Idaho and West Virginia, laws that prohibit boys from playing in girls' sports. The way the argument went, I think they'll both be easily upheld by a 7-2, maybe an 8-1 vote, maybe even unanimous. I just don't think anybody in their right mind can argue that Title IX was intended to protect self-identifying transgendered children. And I think all the laws banning transgender surgery on minors will be upheld. It's just not a suspect category. It is a category of troubled child who deserves support, love, kindness, and care, but not special legal treatment. And that's what I think I'll end up doing. Now I have President Trump, a little bit of tape of his speaking at Dearborn at the Ford gathering after he'd been to the Ford Dearborn plant, cut number 16.
Over. To all Iranian patriots, keep protesting, take over your institutions if possible, and save the name of the killers and the abusers that are abusing you. You're being very badly abused. If the numbers are right now, I hear 5 different sets of numbers. I hear numbers. Look, 1 death is too much. But I hear much lower numbers, and then I hear much higher numbers. But I say save their names because they'll pay a very big price. And I've canceled all meetings with the Iranian officials until the senseless killing of protesters stops. And all I say to them is help is on its way. You saw that I put tariffs on anybody doing business with Iran. Just went into effect today. And I say, make Iran great again. It was a great country until these monsters came in and took it.
Yeah, when Donald Trump talks this way, this bluntly, with such specificity, the mullahs are on notice. Khamenei's been mocking Donald Trump all week. You don't see that unless you follow Khamenei on X and hit the translate function. Bad mistake. So did Maduro. Bad mistake. More coming up on that in a moment. I want to remind you of one of our sponsors, AndrewandTodd.com. Andrew Del Rey, Todd Avakian. They are with Union Mortgage Bank. And Andrew and Todd have been my sponsors for, I think, 15 years, something like that. And they have helped thousands of my listeners. They've helped me. They've helped Dwayne. They've helped many people in the Salem family. But the most important thing is the audience. They are lenders with Union Home Mortgage. They're a bank, all right? So when you call 888-888-1172, you're calling a bank. They underwrite the loan. So they'll ask you for a lot of data. They'll run your credit report. They'll help you fix your credit report to get a better interest rate. Then they'll walk you through what your, and it's very good, especially if you are self-employed, because you won't have W-2s and you'll be $990 in income, and they're good at that. They're very good at actually getting you a loan. They're also very good at refinancing the home you're in. Now, the only thing that's happened good in California in the last 5 years is that home prices shot up again. They've been going up like an escalator for 30 years. So a lot of you may be pressed against the wall by the economy that we inherited from Joe Biden. and 4 years of fecklessness in the face of inflation, if that's you, you might want to refinance, even if you're going to lose one of those wonderful 3% loans. You might end up in the high fives or the low sixes. I don't know. It depends on your individual circumstances and where you want to buy a house or where you're refinancing a house. But you'll get the best deal possible with AndrewandTodd.com. 888-888-1172. And you may want to just ask them, look, I've got a house with a 3% mortgage, $100,000, whatever it is over here, but I have a car payment over here, I have credit cards over here, and I have student debt over here. And they each have a different interest rate and a different balance too. What do you think I should do? And then they will run the numbers. It might make sense for you to refinance your home at 6%, 6.25%, and pay off those other three, which my guess is are in the high single or low double digits when it comes to interest rates. Maybe the car is at somewhere around 7 or 7.5. But your student loan, I don't know what that is. I certainly don't know what your credit cards are. President Trump has proposed a 10% limit that would require a change in law that I frankly do not see forthcoming. But whatever it is, you've got a lot of debt. The total cost of your debt is what ought to matter to you. And whether or not you refinance your house depends upon the total cost of your debt, even though you have one of those shiny object 3% loans. And a lot of people do, and they're never going to give them up. And I'm not talking to them. So AndrewandTodd.com, 888-888-1172. If you have to move and buy a house, if you want to move to get more space, or if you need to refinance, AndrewandTodd.com, 888-888-1172. Now, I also want to call out, I have great audience, and they're very nice to me, even the ones in Indiana. See, a couple of weeks ago, my friends at the universityofsewing.com, yes, there is such a thing. You can look it up, universityofsewing.com. Margaret sent me a bandana. Actually, not a bandana. It was IU, Indiana University, cloth. Like I was going to make a tie or something out of it. And I told you about it, and it's funny. And there's her wonderful picture, and this is her calling card, the universityofsewing.com. So arrives a package yesterday, and in it is this, a Hoosier tie. And as you can tell, if you're watching on the Salem News Channel, they've got the Hoosier, it looks like a trident. It's not really a very good emblem, Indiana. I hate to tell you this. It's not really can we close in on that emblem, Harley? Can we let them see? It's really not a very good looking emblem, if you ask me. It looks like kind of a red trident, like the SEALs had gone communist. That's what it looks like. I don't think the SEALs are going to be communists anytime soon. So, and then I heard this described as the school colors are red and cream. This is not cream. This is silver. Now, I trust the University of Sewing and Margaret, but I just think she's confused with the University. My friends who are Hoosiers, you got to help me out here. I think you're going to kill Miami. All right? I'm pulling for you. Rooting for Big Ten, of course. Not the team up north, so I don't have to be against them. Always against the team up north. But I'm rooting for IU. I want them to win. And I must admit, this is world-changing. Indiana has always been the doormat, right? They were always the homecoming game. And they knew it. And they're like Duke in football. They're a great basketball school. Bobby Knight, hero. Coach K, hero. So they were a basketball school. So this, Kurt Signet, this is world turned upside down, end times. End times. Kind of stuff where the imam comes out. No, I shouldn't say that. I should say, however, thank you to Margaret and to the University of Sewing. She sent me a nice Bernina sewing machines, accessories, and servicing. I am myself not a seamstress, though the fetching Mrs. Hewitt is, and she's very amused that she didn't know there was a University of Sewing either. Bernina sewing machines, accessories, and servicing. And it's got the IU logo. Thank you, Margaret, for... I'm not sure if it's Margaret. My mother was a Marguerite, but it's not how I spell Margaret. I guess it's Margaret. Margaret is that's not... You come and take... I have Generalissimo rule on how to pronounce your name. I'm not allowed to come up with the pronunciations myself. But what's the ruling on the name there, Generalissimo?
Margaret.
Margaret? No, it's not. It's not spelled like Margaret.
Yes, it is.
Margaret is M-A-R-G-E-T. Margaret. No, M-A-R-G-R-E-T.
No, that's Marquette.
No. Marquette is a school in Milwaukee.
Marquette, that's a Florida.
No, this is Margaret?
Margaret.
No, look at that. Margaret.
Margaret.
Okay, Margaret. UniversityofSewing.com. Dwayne has done the unconscionable. He has invoked Saint Margaret Thatcher as the authority in the question of whether or not Margaret.
How does she spell Margaret?
She spells it the Old English way. Margaret. That's the
Which
Old
was the
English.
same on that card, right?
It's the same as on the card, and it's based upon the
English language.
No, the Old English Chaucer Canterbury Tales spelling of Margaret. And then my sainted mother, who was named Marguerite, Dwayne had the nerve to say a good Irish German name like Marguerite was in fact Spanish. So I think actually this is just the Old English spelling. Margaret from the University of Sewing, I yield to Saint Margaret Thatcher. Occasionally I'm right. I'm right, but there are authorities that would otherwise be brought into evidence. All right, now I want to go back to the biggest story in the world. Guess who Donald Trump's going to talk with tonight on a polo side special interview? Tony DeCopel. So I asked him last week, "Are you going to sit down with Tony DeCopel?" He said, "Well, should I?" And I said, "Yes. I want to find out how he does his job." And so we're going to find out tonight. And it's a big night because he could get the scoop on what Donald Trump intends to do in Iran. And when I say hinge moment, I got to explain this for the Steelers fans who are just waking up after the bender they went on last night, after that meltdown in the second half. And boy, oh boy, it was a meltdown. And then Mike Tomlin quit this morning. They're just waking up. They don't know what's going on. So here I am talking fancy about a hinge moment in history. A hinge moment in history is when the door opens or closes. Doors are on hinges, Hinges, hinges. And so a door opens or a door closes. 1979 was a hinge moment. The door opened and the Shah was thrown out of Iran and Ayatollah Khomeini came in. And for 47 years, it's been a nightmare. And everybody who got out will tell you that. And every honest Iranian who's not on the payroll of the regime will tell you that. It's a terror-exporting, crazy regime with an end times theology that very, very, very few people actually believe in. And I'm going to talk with Aviv Reddy-Gur next hour about what exactly the Shia are thinking, or the Shia rulers, because it's not the Shia variant of Islam with which I was familiar when I did a series for the now late great Corporation for Public Broadcasting in 1996, Searching for God in America. I sat down with a Sufi scholar who explained to me that Islam, the dominant variety of Islam, is Sunni. The second, the avis of Islam, is Shia, and everybody else is in the Sufi category or otherwise to be named. But there are lots of variants of Islam. Shia Islam, until 1979, was not radical, was not terror exporting, did not care much for Sunnis, and Sunnis did not care much for Shia, but they weren't on a jihad against Iran, against Israel. That has always been the Wahhabist offshoot of Islam, which is Sunni subvariant Wahhabism. And that got going with Sayyid Qutb and under the shade of the Quran, Milestones was one book, and Under the Shade of the Banyan Tree. I can't remember. He had two big books. But he he actually didn't found, but he made operational the Muslim Brotherhood. And he went to Egypt. He was eventually hung by Nasser, one of the last guys to beg with him to try and get in line with Anwar Sadat, who said, "Look, you're crazy. You're going to drive us into the ditch." And the Muslim Brotherhood, he gave it life. He gave it form. He gave it structure. He gave it a mission. And that infects Sunni mainstream. Mainstream Sunni is nothing to be afraid of. And it's only the Wahhabist extremists that you have to be afraid of. And if you want to learn about that, you read The Looming Tower by Lawrence Wright. It's been out for 15 years. It's still the go-to book. Crisis of Islam by Bernard Lewis is another great one. But about Shia Islam and what happened in Iran, the best book I've read on that is called Vanguard of the Imam by Ashfan Ostovar, O-S-T-O-V-A-R. But as Brett Baer just mentioned, Norm Rule, American, worked for the agency for a long time. And Kareem Sajipour, another American of Iranian descent, works for Carnegie. endowment. They're the two go-to guys. But there's also Mark Dubowitz, who I talked to yesterday. That YouTube video over at my YouTube channel has got thousands of hits already because people are interested in this story. And Fox, as far as I can tell, only Fox is covering it the way it deserves to be covered, which is wall-to-wall. Byron York is a Fox News contributor, as am I. He is also the senior political correspondent for the Washington Examiner. I write a column or two for the Examiner as well. And Byron is the perfect guest today because, Byron, yesterday the Wall Street Journal was fed a story that was not true. The story they were fed was that Vice President Vance was urging President Trump not to take kinetic action against Iraq, pushing diplomacy, etc. The vice president's office went to great lengths today to let the world know that that was not true. I asked Brett about it, and he said there's a lot going on inside of the White House, but he didn't know who would be out to damage the vice president that way, because it makes him sound to be like an isolationist. What do you think is going on there?
Well, we've long had reports sort of inside and out about conflicts between the vice president's office, the shop, and the larger administration, and that is to paint Vance as not on board against some of the foreign interventions and foreign policy.
And Byron, can I interrupt you for a second? That's news to me. I'm in fairly regular contact with the office. He's been on the program. I've been interviewing him for 5 years, back all the way to when his book came out. I can't imagine. He's not a backstabber. That's just not who J.D. Vance is.
Well, yeah, but that's him. I mean, there are lots of other people sort of involved.
Oh, okay.
And, I mean, you have to remember, I mean, when you hear news that's sort of out of the White House or out of a criminal investigation or out of something, it could come from the person who's right in the center of everything, or it could come from somebody out on the periphery who's heard about stuff. So clearly there are, I mean, obviously there is a fight inside MAGA about isolationism, foreign interventions, endless wars, all of this stuff. And the president has proved much more interventionist than I think most people would have predicted from the campaign. And that doesn't sit well with some people who are in his coalition.
Well, the vice president is himself a veteran of the Iraq War, a Marine. And Iraq syndrome is when people think every kinetic action is going to turn into a decade-long commitment of troops, or in the case of Afghanistan, a 2-decade-long commitment of troops. And so Iraq syndrome is sort of like Vietnam syndrome upside down, or a new version of Vietnam syndrome. I don't think the vice president's got that. I don't know anyone in the White House who does. Do you talk to any of the neo-isolationists or the restrainers, as they're sometimes called?
I mean, it's unfortunate that after Vietnam syndrome finally died, we got a new syndrome,
right?
Roughly similar. But I do think the vice president saw a lot of what happened in Iraq as a futile intervention that shouldn't have been made. That the United States goes to war for reasons that turn out to be, not true, as President Bush actually conceded. And then the war bogs down into, basically Americans driving around and being attacked. And then finally there is a surge. They get, stabilized and leave. But I don't think the vice president has a positive feeling or positive assessment of the how the Iraq War went. So, I mean, I think Iraq War syndrome is actually valid. So the question is, do you view every foreign intervention as necessarily ending up like Iraq? And clearly, I think, maybe the worst example of this is Tucker Carlson saying that if the United States bombed the Iranian nuclear program, then it would lead to war and tens of thousands of casualties and all of this stuff that didn't happen.
Yeah, we know that. Now, President Nixon in his retirement wrote a book called No More Vietnams. He did not mean by that no more kinetic action, no more strikes. Right. He meant by that no more getting 500,000 troops bogged down in an endless conflict with no plan to win and with a self-imposed refusal to go to the north or do anything except bomb the north. It was a crazy war. It was run by the McNamara kids and Johnson, and it went very, very badly, and Nixon got it ended. And he said, never do that again. And I think we kind of did that again in Iraq at 2/3 speed or 1/3 speed. I'm not for that either.
Yeah.
Ronald Reagan was never for that either. He was for peace through strength, but he used force when necessary. So did George H.W. Bush.
I think if Donald Trump has a doctrine about foreign interventions, it would be do it fast, do it with overwhelming force, get the job done, it's over. And that works. I mean, that absolutely works. And I think the Iran bombing is an example of that. Because, I personally did not think we needed to bomb Iran because I think that Israel was actually getting this job done in the course of and it was going to get the job done in the course of its war with Iran. But we did it anyway, and it was extremely effective. And it didn't lead to any of the immediate consequences, at least.
So what do you think is on the menu now? Because the president he told me last week we're going to hit him hard if they kill people. He told Sean Hannity that. He put it on True Social a couple of times today in Dearborn. He said it again. Help is on the way. What's that mean to you, Byron York?
I don't know. It looks like they've killed a lot of people.
Oh boy, have they ever?
So what are we going to do? I don't know. When the president said that originally, like the first time he said it, I thought to myself, why are we doing that? There are lots of really bad regimes in the world, and they will kill people who try to, rise up in favor of democracy. This just didn't seem like a good idea to me. But so far, the president hasn't done anything. But as far as if you're a foreign actor is concerned and the president threatens some sort of action, you probably ought to take him seriously because at some point he's going to do it.
The thing that Iran has done that no one else has done is try to kill Donald Trump. So that's kind of a category of one.
That's a good point, and it's never a good idea because there was a lot of talk back in the Iraq War that George W. Bush remembered that Iraq had tried to kill George H.W. Bush. They tried to kill my father.
Yeah.
And Bush would mention that in discussions about the war in Iraq.
Deterrence is a dish best served consistently, not cold or hot, just consistently. I think Donald Trump is rebuilding American deterrence. Byron York, follow him on X at Byron York. See him on the Fox News channel. Read him at the Washington Examiner every morning. Thank you, Byron. I want to remind all my listeners, coming up after the break, Haviv Rettig Gur, senior analyst for the Times of Israel, and I are going to get deep into the significance of the Iranian uprising, whether or not it is, in fact, the hinge moment that I think it is. I think it's a hinge moment. But before I do that, let me remind you about a couple of our sponsors. Consumer Cellular, number one, 1-800-411-4454. I'm doing everything I can to get everybody to check their phone bill. Just find out how much you're paying so that when you call Consumer Cellular at 1-800-411-4454, 1-800-411-4454, or you go to consumercellular.com/you, consumercellular.com/you, you know what you're shopping against. You actually have your invoice in your hand, and you'll be able to work through with the representative based here in the United States, one button press, then you'll be talking to a real live human being in the U.S. You can then say, okay, here's what my bill was, and they'll walk you through finding out how much data you're using. And remember my code, Hugh, H-U-G-H, that gets your second month off if you switch. Switching takes 20 minutes. You keep your number, you keep your data, you keep the same great service you've been having because all cellular networks alike. And I'm here just to tell you should just shop on price and compare apples to apples, data plan to data plan. If you're 50 years and older, of course, you want to ask for the special unlimited data, 2 lines for everyone who's 50 years and older. So you and your partner, you and your spouse, you can get 2 lines of unlimited data for $60 a month. But whether or not you're 50 or over, just call and compare. 1-800-411-4454, 1-800-411-4454. Because until you compare, you don't know whether or not you're spending $30, $40, $100 more than you need to a month. They're not going to tell you. You got to call Consumer Cellular and ask at 1-800-411-4454 or go to consumercellular.com/you. Whole thing about switching takes less than 20 minutes. Also to remind you, I'm in the Relief Factor studio. I always remind you at the hour of end of hour 2. I took it in hour 1. I remind you again in hour 3. Relief Factor really does work. It really does make your life feel better. It really does get rid of the minor aches and pains. It's not going to solve a compound fracture of your fibula and tibula. Not going to do that. But it is going to get rid of those minor aches and pains that come with exercise and aging. I made my annual trek to the dermatologist today, and I'm a little bit nicked up, but that's my weight loss plan. Just go see the dermatologist annually. And she's a few years younger than me, and we were talking about staying active. She's a swimmer. So I said, no, I'm a trundler. And I explained trundling is when you're between 10 and 15 minutes a mile. Walking is when you're over 15 minutes a mile. And we both agreed. And she's been my dermatologist for a quarter century, and she's not going to quit anytime soon. I don't want her to quit. I want her to go till she's 90. She's really good. But everyone, the secret to longevity and being happy is motion, exercise, and Relief Factor is the secret to that. Call 1-800, the number 4, and the word relief, 1-800-4-RELIEF, or go to their website, find the starter pack, $19.95, less than $1 a day for 3 weeks, at relieffactor.com, relieffactor.com. Earlier today, President Trump posted on Truth Social, and I want to read it to you before we get to our guest, Aviv Reddy-Gur. Iranian patriots, now all in caps, keep protesting. Take over your institutions, 3 exclamation points. Save the names of the killers and abusers. They will pay a big price. I have canceled all meetings with Iranian officials until the senseless killing of protesters stops, all in caps, and then all in caps. Help is on its way, period. MIGA, M-I-G-A, make Iran great again, 3 exclamation points. President Donald J. Trump. That posted at 9:43 a.m. East Coast time. I'm joined now by Aviv Reddy-Gur. Aviv is the senior analyst for the Times of Israel. He's also a podcaster. The Ask Aviv Anything podcast comes in long form and in short form. I listened to today's on the 2 Intifadas, which gave me names and dates that I didn't know. Aviv, Happy New Year to you. Welcome back.
Thank you, Hugh. Good to be here. And also just the Free Press. I'm also with the Free Press as a Middle East analyst.
I've always got to say that. Times of Israel, the Free Press, and then we need to tell people you're also on Patreon, which is the only Patreon I belong to because it's the only one I get real value. I subscribe to the Free Press, but I get real value from your Patreon. How do people find that? Just Patreon and Aviv Reddy-Gur?
Yeah, or Ask Haviv Anything on Patreon. Thanks so much for the plug. I really appreciate it.
Well, it's only $5 a month, and it's really very much worth it, like Dan Senor's special edition as well. I've gone into funnels, silos for my news to go deep. Haviv, before I go any further, what do you make of what I think is a hinge moment in Iran, especially in light of what President Trump posted this morning?
At this very moment, there are reports that phone lines can now call out of Iran again. Some of the digital blackout appears to be lifting, or was broken, or maybe hackers did it. We don't quite know. There was a news from CBS News that they got initial reports that the reports about 12,000 dead in the last just 2-3 days that Iran International ran. It might be much higher than that. People in Iran are talking about something very big, very dramatic. These are, early days. We don't have a lot of information. A whole country taken off the internet. But the regime crackdown has gotten lethal. The regime itself has admitted 2,000 dead. So everything is escalating. All the gloves are off. The regime is terrified. And into that context, those signals that we can get out of Iran, President Trump's statement probably echoes very, very loudly. What he said on your podcast, what was it, 3 days ago, where he just said, they know that they're going to pay a price. And he urged people to take the names of officers and officials involved in the repression. That's actually really fascinating because we've already seen that. There was this, what they called a Tiananmen Square moment, where one protester was sitting down on the street in front of the police trying to clear out the protests. And that protester would go on to get beaten by those cops. And what's really fascinating is within a few hours, the names of the agents of the regime who beat the protester were publicized on Iranian internet. And so it's a new day. It's a new moment. Iranians are no longer willing to play the regime's game in huge, huge numbers. We don't yet know how it's going to go. It's important to say 20% of this country is deeply Islamist and believes in the regime's ideology and will die for the regime. not literally 20% of the population will die, but 20% of the population will fight. And the entire Basij militia is hundreds of thousands of people with many more who could volunteer. So it's almost a kind of mini civil war when you have a revolution against this regime. But nevertheless, it has never gone this far. And the rage and the lack of any willingness to tolerate the regime pretending like everything's okay or can never go back to normal, that's all new. And so it is a new moment. It could fail, but it's never gone this far before.
So, Aviv, I had done an entire outline because we schedule this 6 weeks, 2 months in advance to get a hold of Aviv. He's in demand everywhere in the world, and so I'm happy to talk to him every month or so. And we'd scheduled this weeks ago, and I have a whole long list of questions that are going to get pushed to the back about the Haridam and the legal reform and the elections. That's next time. This just came up. Not long ago, you had Barry Strauss on your program. He wrote the new book last year, Jews versus Rome. Fascinating book. I had listened to it on tape. After I listened to your interview, I went back and bought it because the names are hard to get when you're listening. I mean, I know Pompey the Great, and I get Tiberius, and I know this proconsul and Cestius and all these various things, but I need to get the chronology in black and white. So I really want to kind of do the same thing with you. Throughout that book, which is the history of the Great Revolt, 66 AD to 70, and of the Diaspora Revolt and of the Bar Kokhba revolt in about 130 AD. I want to go back then because Iran is all through that book under the name of Parthia. And so Iran, modern-day Iran, was part of ancient Parthian Empire, the only empire that kind of got to a standoff with Rome. Prior to the revolution in 1979, how did Israel and Iran get along?
They were quite good friends. They were, I don't want to exaggerate it. They weren't, bosom buddies, but they had a real relationship and alliance. They shared enemies, and sharing enemies is a very powerful incentive in the Middle East to be close. And more than that, the Iran of the Shah, okay? The Shah had a repressive regime. It was a deeply problematic regime. It killed people. It was nothing compared to what the Ayatollahs would go on and build after the revolution to topple the Shah. But nevertheless, the Shah was not a democrat. But the Iran of the Shah was a modern country. It was a country where women walked around with their hair out, and universities were real universities. And one of the tragedies of the last 47 years of Ayatollah's rule, and there are many tragedies. Iran is a gutted country. It's an economy in ruins. It doesn't have electricity. It doesn't have, it's one of the wealthiest in terms of hydrocarbon reserves countries on earth, and people live with less electricity than in much of the third world. I mean, it's a country that has been demolished by this regime. And the Iran before this regime of the Shah was a country that was modernizing with modern universities and modern economy, and was looking for ways to have investment and development. Incidentally, last time you interviewed President Trump noted that he had friends back in the 70s who were real estate developers in New York, who were looking at Iran to build and had built buildings in Iran, and investing in Iran was a smart move because of those hydrocarbon reserves, because it was an economy that could have turned the place into, some mix of Saudi Arabia and Turkey. There's nothing preventing that from happening, except that the Islamist section of Iranian society took over the country and ruined it. Israel saw a friend, Israel saw a modern nation, and Israel saw basically just the modern commercial world that everybody wants to live in. In other words, a world that's not taken over by crazy ideologues demolishing their own country just to retain power. So Iran was that. It was a friend. It was what the Middle East should always have been and would have been, but for some very bad
could
ideology.
Be. When you say it could have been a mix of Turkey and Saudi Arabia, I think it could have been another Israel, because they had the wealth and they had the university and a tremendous base in 1979 of an educated elite who could have been at the vanguard of the technology revolution of the last 50 years. Instead, they went backwards. And you're probably not old enough to remember this, but I remember it well. In 1979, I was working for then exiled President Nixon in San Clemente, and Ray Price and I, and he would sit on a couch and watch this, and the whole world thought Khomeini was going to be a good force. Did the Israelis get tricked by that too? The whole world, not Nixon. Nixon said this is a disaster, But did Israel think Khomeini would bring anything better than the Shah?
I can't speak for every analyst, and it's a big country with a lot of people who have very strong views and not necessarily a lot of knowledge. Speaking as a media pundit, right? No, for Israel, this was a disaster, and it was very clearly a disaster. And in fact, Khamenei made a point of building his coalition with the communists and building his coalition with the third world, as we might call them today, with all of these anti-Western powers that were secular, that were progressive in Iran. I'm not speaking now about college campuses in America. I'm talking about, Iran in the 70s. He actually built his coalition that was able to topple the Shah with these other powers. One of the main things they shared of all the topics on earth, they didn't agree on religion, they didn't agree on the economy, they didn't agree on who should actually run the place after the revolution. They all agreed that the Jews of Israel were an evil crime against history and had to be removed, whether for progressive secular reasons or for Islamic reasons.
Haviv, the reason I brought up in the first segment Barry Strauss is it seems to me that an ancient civilization like Persia, which was part of the Parthian Empire, has beneath it, just beneath the surface of this Islamist radicalism, extremism, another civilization. You study history. Israel's an ancient civilization. Do they lay dormant forever, or is there reason to give hope that maybe the 80% of Iranians who want to connect with their Persian roots can overwhelm the regime?
This is an extraordinary nation, and it has faced really a gutting kind of brain drain. Probably hundreds of thousands. I mean, hundreds of thousands of scholars and scientists and mathematicians and are contributing to every country in the world except Iran because they can't do their work in Iran under this regime. It is an extraordinary civilization. It is ancient. It has one of the cynical elements of the regime is that every time there's a protest, every time there's one of these, uprisings against the regime and it feels a little threatened, it starts to talk about Persian history, about the Persian civilization, about the great ancient Iranian people. And as soon as everything stabilizes, this is something that Roya Khakakian, an Iranian-American writer, said beautifully. As soon as the regime stabilizes, it goes back to being Islamist and in part having this ideology of erasing that Iranian past in favor of this puritanical Islam. So there is absolutely a cultural contest, a culture war, but a deeper sense, not culture war, Republicans, Democrats, like an ordinary Western culture war in a democracy. There's a culture war between the two cultures of Iran, the Islamic version, pushed by Khamenei, not sort of a peaceful, ordinary Islam, but this militant, revolutionary, on the march, demolishing countries version, and everything that Iran and Persia, and you mentioned, Parthia, as you said, all this ancient story of this ancient storied people who are extraordinarily talented and extraordinarily wise. I should say Persian Jews fled Iran in the vast, vast majority, less than 20% remains in the country, and they're under constant regime surveillance, and they can't leave the country without forfeiting their every last asset. And even then, 80% chose to leave, and they are a huge, strong, wealthy, successful community, both in Israel, in California, anywhere where they step. So, this is an absolutely extra. You'd start measuring, finding metrics of achievement of Iranians. It's amazing, and their country is totally gutted, and their economy looks like I don't know what, the bottom billion of this world. I mean, the failures of the UN Human Development Reports, and there's no reason for it except this regime.
Yeah,
and by the way,
go ahead. Go ahead, Aviv. You were going to say, by the way.
Venezuela in that sense, where you had one of the wealthiest countries of South America, successful, democratic, and then a bad ideology takes over, and a third of the country turns into refugees, and people can't eat. And that's the story. That's the story of this regime. People should look up the literal water shortages that have gutted Iranian agriculture. They should look up, the scale of the hydrocarbon reserves. They should look up the incompetence. The 12-day war, with President Trump's decision to help the Israelis with Midnight Hammer, because he has said for literally 2 decades Iran can't get a bomb. All of that stuff is what everyone's talked about. But just for a second, let's take a step back and just look at Iran. This regime for 47 years has told its people they need to sit quiet and suffer because the regime is doing some great important thing for Islam. What is that great important thing? Preparing the destruction of Zionism. And never mind if that's a good or bad thing. I happen to like my people and my country and my nation and my children. But even if you don't like my people, 47 years of preparation, and Israel cleaned their clock in 12 days. An Iranian general used to be able to walk around the streets of Tehran and command some respect. An Iranian general who walks the streets of Tehran today, the guy the Israelis didn't bother killing, is the only reason he's alive, if you're in the IRGC. So there's just why? What again, leave the morality aside, just look at the competence. This regime.
You also mentioned in the first segment we talked about, you mentioned the fact that they have been brutalized by their currency collapse. I think one of the reasons that this is a hinge moment is the rial is worthless. So everybody's life savings, including those of the besieged, those of the IRGC, everyone except the very top elite who managed to turn it into gold or jewels, they've been wiped out in the last 6 months or since Operation Midnight Hammer and the Israeli 12-day war. Do you think that is a driver here? Because, by the way, coverage of Iran in the United States is awful. I have to go to the Times of Israel to learn anything about what's going on in Iran because the American press doesn't care or doesn't have the expertise. So do you think that the collapse of the rial gives this one more energy than the women's movement in 22 or the Green movement in 2009?
Absolutely. We've already had revolutions or protests, uprisings of the students, of the liberal activists. We've seen that, and they were easily crushed. Didn't help that President Obama wouldn't support them. And then we saw, the woman life. I forget
freedom
exactly.
Women Freedom Life. Yeah.
Women Freedom Life movement, which was a whole new thing because it was specifically about the religious restrictions and about the religious regime. And ever since that, by the way, it was crushed, and it was crushed brutally. 20,000 people were arrested and thrown in prison. But the regime has started to get a little more lax in enforcing the hijab rules, for example. And so we know that they got scared. Now we're seeing something completely different. Over the last year, and even more than a year, you've had because you have these electricity shortages, because you have these running, water shortages, you had different groups protesting. You had the truckers union protesting. You had agriculturalists, farmers, and various kinds of people who work in agriculture starting to mount serious protests. You have a lot of disquiet among the Arabs in the South. You have a lot of movement in all kinds of different sections. And then the rial plunges and just implodes. And then you get the bazaris. The bazaar is the small shopkeepers or right up to, significant importers, the business people of Iran, the people on whom the economy stands, the people the regime has to keep happy. They didn't join this uprising. They are this uprising. Everybody else, the students, the farmers, everybody joined them. So we suddenly have a cross-section of Iranian society of people who have never protested, wouldn't have protested, but they can't live anymore. This regime has gutted everything. And one of the points that I made before about the currency, the rial collapsed if you're not close to the regime. If you are close to the regime, the government actually enforces a separate currency exchange rate for you. So you can afford to, live, feed your family, buy iPhones. Everyone else in the country can't afford water and electricity. And so this regime has driven more and more sections of Iranian society to rise up against it. And this might be that tipping. It might not, but it might be that tipping.
It reminds me of Poland in 85 and then the East Bloc in 87 to 89 and then the Soviet Union in 89 to 91. They're all gone now. Haviv, Israel's got 10 million people. Iran's got 90 million people. On October the 7th, Israel suffered 1,200 murders. And the numbers coming out of Iran are not yet. Well, I guess the high estimates would be roughly proportional. The high estimates are 12,000 that have been phoned into CBS News have been butchered by the mullahs. What kind of effect do you think that will have, that kind of a massacre? Because you've lived it. You've lived it for 2.5 years. What do you think the average Iranian emotional state is? Because everyone's going to know someone when 12,000 people get mowed down.
Yeah, let me just say, Iranians have suffered a lot more than Israelis. Um, my own government didn't do it to me, and I don't live in an oppressive state, and I, the ordinary Iran, 92 million people in Iran don't have a vote and don't decide the most fundamental things and have been essentially forced to live in poverty for the regime's revolution. And so this regime massacring people is it's a whole different story. If the United States government, because of some cultural war or Vietnam protests, hates somebody, then all of America talks about it. And right, it's different from a brutal, oppressive 5-decade regime that forces women to cover their hair everywhere, suddenly murdering many, many thousands of people who are demanding things like the right to vote. So Iranians are suffering profoundly. Their families are struggling literally to get by, to eat. And this regime is willing to murder huge swaths of its people. One really dangerous statement came out of Khamenei himself, who said, "We lost hundreds of thousands of people to make the revolution happen." And he's not talking about the revolution that toppled the Shah. He's probably, I don't know what, talking about the Iran-Iraq war.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
We're willing to kill hundreds of thousands. That's the bar for protecting this revolution. He's threatening to kill in the 6 figures. And that's the thing that everybody has to watch out for right now, how this regime suddenly ups the ante. You don't shut off the entire country's internet if you're not trying to hide something.
Now, if he sums up the Iraq-Iran war, I read a book by a fellow by the name of Ahsan Ostavar called Vanguard of the Imam. And he said that their strength, the regime's strength, was rooted in the veterans of that war, the Iraq-Iran war, which ran for 10 years and about which I think Donald Rumsfeld famously said, "Can't they both lose?" But the question, that generation of veterans, they're dead or they're very old men now. Do they still have a grip on the imagination of the country?
They have nothing. They have nothing. They have no grip. There's that, again, there's a 20% of Iran's population. You hear this from academics in the West, from Iranians. You hear this from Israeli intelligence, which, as we learned back in June, have a pretty good sense of what's happening in Iran. There is 20% of the Iranian population that is utterly, totally committed to this regime ideologically. It's having the same economic troubles everybody else is having. We're not seeing them come out quite in the same numbers as in the past, even though the danger is greater. I don't know what that means. I don't know if that just means that they're going to come out next week. I don't know what that means. I don't know to say. Everything is moving, and we're getting these very sort of minor, small signals, and we're trying to interpret the larger picture. But the 80% who aren't in that deep Islamist true believer section of Iranian society have no respect for this regime at all and view this regime correctly as just a mafia. It's just a mafia. There's no, they don't even believe in the things that they say. The regime generals, their families, more and more of their families live abroad, live in the United States, live in Britain, live in places where they don't have to suffer with the people that their own family members in the IRGC are forcing to suffer. And so there is this deep disconnect. This stuff makes its way through Iranian social media. Everybody knows it. They're a mafia that pretends to be a religious movement. It hasn't been a religious movement for decades. And that's basically the story here.
So I would encourage everyone to go over to the Commentary podcast, because Eli Lake was the guest on Commentary podcast today, and he made the point Haviv just averred to, which is that a lot of the Iranian elite are abroad, their children are abroad, and that one of the things the United States and England and other people ought to consider is sending them home, is saying, you got to go live with the disaster that is the country that your parents have made, and they've sent you to school. And he mentioned that the daughter of the Iranian prime minister, I think that's what he said, or the Iranian president, is a nursing student at Emory. Now, don't give her a hard time. It's not her fault what her parents have built and her father has built. But Haviv makes an important point. I do believe we're at one of those hinge moments in history where what happens in Iran is going to drive a lot of the next 30 to 50 years. Haviv, I've got Bernard Lewis books by the shelf load. I've read about the Looming Tower by Lawrence Wright. You and I have talked about Hamas and Wahhabism and radical Sunni Islam. Radical Shia Islam, I don't get at all, other than they're waiting for the hidden imam to come out of the well. Why in the world do they support Hamas? And why are the Jews so central to their theology? Do you have any idea?
It's extraordinary. It's an extraordinary thing. In Sunni Islam, any Muslims listening to us will know this, or if they don't, they should look it up because they should know this. And anyone else, please fact check it. In Sunni Islam, the most widespread tradition is that Al-Aqsa, which translates to the thing at the edge in Hebrew, Katzeh, the place Muhammad goes to at the end of his life and ascends to heaven. That place is Jerusalem. That is a widespread Sunni tradition, not the only Sunni tradition, but nevertheless widespread. In Shia Islam, Al-Aqsa is not in Jerusalem. It is simply not. There is no Shia tradition of that. It is in Iraq. And the whole idea that this regime has sort of latched onto this Sunni vision, it's an attempt to create a political argument for Iranian leadership of the Muslim world. And Iran's leadership also saw its own attempt to destroy Israel and building out these proxies with tens of billions of dollars over 40 years that Iranians didn't have. But the spending on Hezbollah and the proxies in Iraq and Syria and the Houthis of Yemen and Hamas, and huge spending on Hamas, hundreds of millions of dollars at least. All of this investment in this proxy system to destroy Israel was essentially a Shia argument in the Muslim world. You Sunnis have failed to destroy Israel for a century. You have, embarrassed Islam in that sense. We will succeed, and that will be evidence that Shia Islam is correct. That's the kind of stuff you actually get when you drill down into it. When you actually listen to an interview on Al Jazeera or whatever with an Iranian Ayatollah, and you actually try and get into why do you want to destroy Israel? I'm not saying why you don't like Israel. You don't like Israel. You know what? You cannot like France too. Who cares? Not why don't you like Israel? Why are you invested to the point of gutting your own economy with this obsession of the destruction of a country you have no border with and no interests in? What is that? And you very quickly discover it isn't actually Shia Islam. It is Islam. It's an Islamic veneer on an imperialist project that's meant to force the Sunnis to rally behind the Iranians. That's it. It's a regional control that Khamenei developed back in the 70s and 60s.
Oh, that makes... See, you just gave me at least a narrative to understand, because I can go find a Sunni extremist imam preaching on the internet the destruction of Israel in about 10 minutes. And it's whether it's ISIS or whether it is Al-Qaeda, whether it's any of their offshoot groups around the world. But I can't find Shia imams. They're supposed to be almost as peaceful as another branch of Islam, the third branch, which is eluding me right now, the one that's very, very peaceful. Why don't we know that? Is there no effort to expose what the Shia pretenders are that Israel and the United States are undertaking? Is there any effort to put that message out there to delegitimize the regime?
Shia have, in the Muslim world, a long tradition of being oppressed by the Sunnis. And so the Shia have developed a much less, it's weird for me to fly the flag of the Shia right now. I mean, the greatest force trying to annihilate my people at this moment is a Shia political force. But nevertheless, the Shia have been less aggressive, less conquering, belligerent, colonialist and imperialist than Sunnis overall over 14 centuries. I'm not singling out any particular people or group or time, but in general, the Shia have been the oppressed and are much less committed to a kind of conquering vision of Islam than the Sunnis. So the Muslim Brotherhood vision of the takeover, of getting back to the takeover of the world, that's a Sunni project and doesn't really make sense in Shiism until really Khomeini, Ayatollah Khomeini, who founded this Iranian version of Shiism, this political Shiism. So just in general, if you go to the Shia of Lebanon, until they were radicalized by vast Iranian money through Hezbollah, Lebanese Shia were a quiet group. They were not on the warpath. They did not conduct conquest and massacres. It's similar for the Alawites of Syria, who are sort of
I was
Shia
thinking of the
adjacent.
Sufis. I couldn't come up with the name of the Sufis. They're the very pacifist branch of Islam, if I am remembering my Lewis correctly. But Shia was not Wahhabist.
Yeah, Shia have never been Wahhabist. All the Wahhabism, all of the Muslim Brotherhood stuff, all the stuff you get out of the Al Qaeda stuff, the Sayyid Qutb, and all of that stuff all happened in Sunnism. All this radicalizing of Islam in the modern age happened in Sunnism, and the Shia were very late to the game. And Khomeini basically brought in a lot of these ideas and a lot of these ways of thinking and talking and gave it a Shia veneer and Shia vocabulary. But he basically did that as a power play to take over Iran. That was the idea. It's hard to understand this regime in Iran as a religious movement just because it refuses to act as one. It really is just about oppression and power. And when you actually go to meet the Shia and talk to Shia in Iraq, for example, you get a very ambiguous kind of relationship with this Shiism of Iran as this thing that isn't what Shiism always was. Even, by the way, if Iran will support them in their great internal sectarian wars in Iraq against the Sunnis and the brutality of the Sunnis during Saddam's time and all of that, you can sometimes get an appreciation for this ally in Shia Iran. But you still don't see an Iraqi Shia, and Lebanese Shia, and Syrian Shia, and frankly, until the Houthis and Yemeni Shia. You don't see that kind of aggression that the Iranians introduced into Shia politics. And so the Iranians took over and kind of reframed Shia politics in the Middle East in a way that has demolished, frankly, every Shia polity, or every polity that has a large population of Shia. Iran has been a disastrous curse on the Shia Sunnis of the Arab world and of Persia itself.
I'm going to talk to Haviv a little bit off air. I'll add it to the podcast today, but please don't go anywhere. You stay on the radio station or on the television station, but I will add the last bit of Haviv to the podcast. You can find it on my YouTube and at my podcast. I hope you found Haviv Reddy Gur as enlightening, incisive, and entertaining as I always do. I talk to him roughly once every 6 weeks or so, whenever we can nail him down. He's traveling around the world. But that will be over at my YouTube channel. All you have to do is Google Hugh Hewitt and YouTube, and it will take you right to my channel. I would appreciate it if you liked and subscribed so that we would get up in the algorithm. We'll send out between 2 and 4, sometimes 5 videos a day of interviews. Once in a while, I'll send out a monologue, but mostly it's interviews. And sometimes those interviews are 6 minutes, and sometimes they're 45 minutes. It's what you will get. You don't have to watch any of them, but you will know who my guests have been. For example, Brett Baer today, maybe he said something that you got just the last end of and you want to get it all. That's why you go to the YouTube channel. There are also 2 podcasts you want to make note of. Highly Concentrated Hugh, available wherever podcasts are, and Dwayne's World, D-U-A-N-E, Dwayne's World. You can find it at any podcast network or go to dwayne.world as well. That's my podcast and Dwayne's podcast. Finally, you can follow me on X at Hugh Hewitt. I have a Facebook page as well. Generalissimo has his X page at Radio Blogger. Let me remind you, I'm in the Relief Factor Studio West, and everything I do every day is brought to you from a Relief Factor studio, whether it's up north, whether it's down inside the Beltway or out west. And who knows, maybe we'll have a Relief Factor studio south someday. I have no idea. Florida looks very inviting after I've been in California for a few weeks and see that the doggone state just doesn't work anymore. Thank you, 16 years of one-party rule. Steve Hilton was on yesterday. If you go to my YouTube channel, you can look at Steve Hilton and Gloria Romero and say, oh, you know what, I'm going to sign up with them. But in the meantime, Relief Factor is what you want to take every single day to keep the minor aches and pains away. Aches and pains that come from the gym or from exercise, whether you're a runner, a swimmer, or a gym rat, whether you're a canoer, maybe you're a kayaker. I don't know what it is that you do, but whatever it is that you do that gives you minor aches and pains, aging will do that too. Minor aches and pains can be dealt with over the counter, aspirin, Tylenol, Advil, Aleve, whatever. Or you can try Relief Factor and do it all natural supplements like carrion, curcumin, resveratrol, omega. The starter pack is $19.95. All you have to do is call 1-800, the number 4, and the word relief. 1-800, the number 4, and the word relief. And you can get that starter pack for $19.95. That's less than $1 a day. Nothing like it. You can go try and shop for these various ingredients like carrot, curcumin, resveratrol, omega at a nutrition store. It'll take you a lot of time. You'll have to figure out the correct dosage, and then you have to keep them apart and then it's just a mess. Let Relief Factor do it for you. The starter pack gives you enough for 3 weeks. You try 3 packets a day for the first week, 2 packets a day for the second week, and then you're like me for 13 years now on 1 packet a day. But you cannot get the effects until you've tried it for a couple of weeks, so at least give it a try. The starter pack is $19.95. Call 1-800, the number 4 and the word relief, 1-800-4-RELIEF, or go to relieffactor.com, relieffactor.com. I'm out the door and getting ready for a Legato speech tonight.